The story of Cuchulainn. A boy called Setanta lived with his mother in a small house some 20 miles from the castle of his uncle Conor MacNessa. The castle was called Ewan Macha, and it was the headquarters of the Red Branch Knights, famous defenders of Ulster. Though he was still young, Setanta yearned to go there and join the group of apprentice warriors. He constantly pestered his mother to let him go, until one day she spoke to him in a gentle voice and with a sad look in her eye. "I can't stop you any longer, Setanta. I can see that you are a special boy, and a mother's love cannot stand in the way of your destiny. Go if you must, but remember that I love you and will always be here for you." Though he was sad to leave his mother, Setanta was overjoyed that she was allowing him to go with her blessing. He was thrilled at the thoughts of the adventures that lay ahead. He kissed his mother goodbye and set off in the direction of Ewan Macha, with only a hurley stick and a slither. He played and made up games as he walked, and the time seemed to pass quickly. He came to a settlement, and an old woman pointed him in the direction of the fort of his uncle. As he approached, Setanta could hear the noise of over 100 boys playing in the green area outside. Many of them were playing a game of hurling. Impetuously, Setanta jumped into the middle of their game, won the ball, and dodged his way through the crowd of boys to score. He raised his hands in the air in triumph, but the leader of the boys, Cuchulainn, was very angry. He strode over and shook Setanta roughly. "Who do you think you are, coming into our game without an invitation or even an acknowledgement? How dare you? Do you know who we are?" He looked around at the large group of boys encircling him and calling out, "Let him have it, boys." A group of boys fell on Setanta, kicking him and punching him, and there was great noise and commotion. The king heard it and came out to see what was going on. When he saw so many boys attacking the smaller, younger Setanta, he was angry and shouted for the boys to stop. "What are you thinking of? Attacking a younger, smaller boy like that? That's no behaviour for my young warriors. I'm disappointed in you, Cuchulainn. What have you got to say for yourself?" "Father, this boy was not invited to join our game. He showed us disrespect." The king nodded. "I see. Now unhand him." Sullen-faced, the boys let go of Setanta and walked away. Setanta stood up and dusted himself down. The king asked, "Well, what have you got to say for yourself, boy?" Setanta held himself proudly and answered in a loud, confident voice, "I am your nephew, Setanta, and I have come here to join your group. And look at the welcome I've got." The king laughed. "Little Setanta, is it? Well, you certainly are a lad of courage and confidence. However, in order for any newcomer to join the group, they must first request their protection. Did you do this?" Setanta shook his head. "I did not know that, sir. I'm sorry." The king smiled. "And do you want to do it now?" "Yes, sir." Setanta asked the boys for their protection, and they gladly offered it, and Setanta was now one of their group. The matter apparently settled, the king turned to go, but then he heard a terrible din behind him. He looked over his shoulder to see Setanta knocking several boys to the ground. "Setanta," he roared, "what are you doing?" Setanta shouted back fiercely, "They must seek to go under my protection, as I have under theirs. I'll knock every one of them to the ground, unless they agree." The king watched in amazement as one by one, each of the boys agreed to submit to the protection of the smaller and younger Setanta. Over the coming months, Setanta settled quickly into his new life. He quickly established himself as the leading sportsman of all the group, and in fights could take on 50 boys at a time and win. One afternoon, one of the boys took Setanta's hurley stick and hid it as a joke. Setanta was furious and chased some 60 terrified boys through the castle until they all cowered behind Connor's table, begging for mercy. Effortlessly, Setanta lifted the enormous table into the air, tossed it aside, and ran after the boys. Connor intervened and asked his guards to take Setanta to the dungeon to cool off. But Setanta fought the guards off easily. The king realized that this boy needed to be treated in a special way. He quickly arranged for Setanta to have his hurley returned to him and forbade him from terrorizing the other boys. He then had a room prepared for Setanta next to his own in order to separate him from the group and keep them out of harm's way. The first morning the king's servant went to wake Setanta for breakfast, he got a punch to the face that knocked him unconscious, and never again did anyone dare to wake Setanta. Sometime after this, Connor was invited to come to the house of Cuchulainn with some of his most trusted friends. He decided to invite Setanta to come with them and planned to have him make a display of his physical prowess for Cuchulainn and his people. As his chariot was being prepared, Connor walked over to where Setanta was playing a game against 60 boys and winning. He asked Setanta to leave with him, but he refused, saying that he wanted to finish the game. The king was not used to being talked to in this way by anyone, let alone by a boy. But to his friend's amazement, he accepted Setanta's reply, asking only that the boy follow them to Cuchulainn's when he was ready. Cuchulainn welcomed Connor and his men into his home. He brought them food and drink and then said, "Now, gentlemen, you are my guests for the night. I want you to relax and feel at home. You may put aside your weapons, for I can assure you of your safety here. My hound is the most vicious guard dog in all the land. A gang of 20 men could not get past him without being savaged. Excuse me a moment while I release him into the grounds." Connor and his men began to eat and drink, forgetting all about Setanta following behind. An hour later, the men had feasted on roasted pig and lamb and were enjoying the fine wine from Cuchulainn's cellar when they heard a tremendous commotion from outside. Cuchulainn stood up. That may be the sound of some poor souls realizing that they've come to the wrong house for thieving of animals or causing upset. Cuchulainn walked to the door and opened it, with the others following him. They looked out into the night and saw Setanta standing there alone. The place was eerily quiet. Connor suddenly remembered that Setanta had been following him after his game. "My God, boy, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot that you were coming after us. Are you okay?" he said. Setanta threw down the carcass of a great animal on the doorstep. "I am, sir, but he's not." Cuchulainn gasped. "You've killed my beloved hound. Who will protect me and my family now? My stocks will be raided and my crops destroyed." Setanta looked closely at Cuchulainn and looked around at the fort. "This seems a fine place, and you're a friend of my uncle's. I will stay here with you. I will be your new hound and protect you until you can find and train a dog to replace the one you've lost." Cuchulainn looked at Setanta for a moment, wondering if he was serious. Then he tapped the boy on the back and declared, "Well then, henceforth you shall be known as Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cuchulainn." And this was how Cuchulainn got his name. Years later, Cuchulainn went to Scotland to study with a woman warrior known as Cuchulainn. He became friends with a warrior from Connacht named Ferdia. Both of similar age and ability, they quickly formed a warm friendship. They vowed always to be friends and never to fight each other. But it was a vow they could not keep. After their training, they both returned to their respective provinces, and many years later, Cuchulainn was under attack from Queen Maeve. She sent her best warriors to fight him, but he beat them off effortlessly. Even when she sent them 6 at a time, it soon became next to impossible for her to find anyone willing to fight Cuchulainn. There was only one Connacht warrior alive who could beat Cuchulainn, and that was Ferdia. Maeve tried beseeching and threatening him, but he refused to come to her castle. Eventually, she goaded him into coming by using storytellers and poets to attack his honour and good name. Once there, she offered him riches, the hand of her daughter, even the chance to lie with Maeve herself if he would fight for her. But he stubbornly refused to fight his old friend. Growing desperate, Maeve resorted to a different tactic. She knew that Ferdia was a proud man who could bear no slur on his honour. She told Ferdia that Cuchulainn had said that he didn't consider him much of a challenge anyway, and that to defeat him wouldn't mean a great deal to him. Maeve then laughed and said, "Sure, isn't he right? Aren't you afraid of the man?" Ferdia left to fight Cuchulainn at dawn the next day. When Cuchulainn received word of who was coming to fight him, his heart sank. He knew that one of them would die, and he would almost prefer to die himself than to kill his dear friend Ferdia. They met at Ardee and exchanged pleasantries mixed with barbs and insults. They fought with swords and darts until midday, with no injuries on either side. For the rest of the day, they fought with spears, and both were wounded, though neither seriously. The day's fighting over, they then ate and talked together for the rest of the evening. The next day, they fought from their chariots, attacking each other with spears. This time, they inflicted serious injuries on each other, and much damage was done. But again, they spent the evening together, and their servants spent the evening together, and there was harmony and goodwill between the parties. But their hearts were heavy the next day, as the reality of their situation became inescapable. One of them must die. Cuchulainn said to Ferdia, "You are doomed. You know that I will surely kill you, and you fight me as a result of the trickery of a woman." But still they fought, and great pieces of flesh were hacked out of their bodies, and blood poured from them in streams. On the 4th day, the men gave it their all, and the earth shook. The heavens cracked with thunder and lightning, and even the sun seemed to fall from the sky as their combat grew in intensity. They moved closer together and soon were in hand-to-hand combat. Eventually, Ferdia succeeded in plunging his sword into Cuchulainn's chest and inflicting a serious wound. Cuchulainn was desperate now and resolved to use his ultimate weapon, the Gay Bulga. This was a vicious spring-loaded javelin that released 30 barbs of steel into the opponent's body and could not be removed without cutting out the flesh. When Ferdia saw it coming, he tried desperately to protect his stomach with his horn skin that no weapon could pierce, but he was too late. Its barbs went into every part of Ferdia's body. As Ferdia collapsed and died, Cuchulainn, barely alive himself, stood over him and cried for the needless death of his dear friend. Over the years as a great warrior, Cuchulainn had many enemies, but none were so fierce as Maeve. She was determined to finish him off once and for all, and she finally had her chance. She sent the daughters of Cuchulainn to surround the place where she knew Cuchulainn to be staying and entice him into the open. They tried many tactics without success, but then they imitated the sound of King Connor's shield screaming. Now Connor's shield only made that sound when its owner was being attacked. When Cuchulainn heard that scream, he simply could not stop himself from following the sound. He mounted his chariot, and his driver, Laig, took them to where Cuchulainn believed the battle to be. When they got there, there was, of course, no sign of Connor. All around them were men engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The daughters of Cuchulainn had supplied 3 magical spears to their allies, and they were meant for Cuchulainn. The first was thrown. It missed him, but killed his loved and trusted charioteer, Laig. Cuchulainn rushed to hold his friend as he lay dying, and a second spear was thrown at him. This also missed Cuchulainn, but mortally wounded the most magnificent of all the horses, the Grey of Machar. The final spear was thrown by the most skilled of his adversaries, Lugaid. Cuchulainn looked down in horror as the spear pierced his armour and his intestines spilled out. A silence came over the battlefield as they watched Cuchulainn hold his wound together and stagger to a nearby lake. He was mortally wounded, but still none dared approach him for fear that he would make one last attack. Cuchulainn drank from the lake and then made his way to a tall, standing stone. There he used his belt to tie himself to it, in order that he could die standing up. For 3 days, Cuchulainn fought death, but eventually he let out an enormous sigh, and the stone split at his back as the life escaped. His death was confirmed for all to see when Badva, the goddess of battle, landed on Cuchulainn's shoulder in the form of a black raven. The heavens opened, and a great rain fell all over Ireland. And it was said that the gods themselves were weeping the death of the last true mortal hero.